How are all of you doing today? Hope all of you are well. Some of you I met as I was waiting at the entrance over there. Got to know some of you, and I'm happy to see that there's such a turnout like this on a Sunday. Like you guys could be doing other things, but you decided to come and hear me speak. And I almost threatened you moments ago by saying that I might not speak. So, so between the speaking and the non-speaking, there might be some learning happening. But I promise you, I'm not going to be the one imparting that learning to you. We rely on much greater individuals to do this task. But maybe what I could do is I could start off by sharing a couple of quotations here that I have with you. I believe most of these you will have already heard, which is good. Speak louder. Sorry. If you want me to speak louder, just let me know. I thought you were praying. I was like, what is she doing? All right. So, but please, if you feel like I'm not able to get to you, then please remind me, I'll do the necessary, or come sit next to me here. I don't bite. Yeah, look at this. It looks too comfortable though. I wouldn't sit there necessarily. And so he goes for it, right? All right. So I'm going to begin with reading some of these sayings to you. Like I said, I think you probably have heard some of these before. And then I have basically this is there's a purpose that I have for why I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to reveal that to you just yet. So here they are in no particular order, and we're going to do two things. First, I'm going to read them to you, maybe one by one, and I'm going to ask you to see if you can identify who the speaker is. So this is kind of a test of your general knowledge. And if you don't get it, that's okay. And if you do, then I'll be very impressed. So here we go. I'll start with one that's pretty light. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. If I could impersonate, I would have impersonated it. You probably would have under. But this is known. Yeah. Yes, Martin Luther King Jr. Not Martin Luther, but yeah. Good. Okay, just making sure. Awesome. Okay, good. So she gets the point. Okay, next one. The unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates. Good. Or Plato on the, puts it on the tongue of Socrates. Right. Good. Where there's a will, there's a way. No one knows actually. It's a saying, right? There's no name attributed to associated with this saying. Where there's a will, there's a way. There is a slight correction to this. Not a correction as much as maybe a slight clarification. He is allowed to come and sit anywhere he likes because this is a dear beloved. This is the most comfortable seat in the house, they say. Yeah. Apparently people fall asleep on this couch. Sorry. I do the same. Roshanisha, I'm so happy you're here. Oh my God. If this was like how formal can we get? Because I like to get up and hug this guy. Am I allowed to do that? Okay, I'll do that after. Bless you. Okay, so we're just going over a couple of sayings. That's what we've done so far. I've read one. It says, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And somebody suggested that was by Martin Luther King Jr., which is correct. The other saying is, "The unexamined life is not worth living," which is by Socrates. Then there's this one, "Where there's a will, there's a way," which somebody said it at some point, and it became a kind of important maxim in the English language. Here's another one. A lot of us use this probably in our daily lives. "Don't judge a book by its cover." This made a lot of sense in cultures where people read books. These days, I'm not sure. You might have to say, "Don't judge an iPhone cover by, I don't know, by its cover," or whatever. I don't know how you say that, but okay. But that too, as far as I know, I don't know who said it, but it's something that's kind of common knowledge. All right, here's another one of my favorite. "The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts." The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. This is a very profound saying. You'll see why it's in this discussion today? Can anybody venture at a guess at who might have said this? Okay, did you ever watch the movie Gladiator? All right. Yeah, Marcus Aurelius. Okay, good. Yeah, good. Marcus Aurelius, in his famous Meditations, said this. Look at that. He was a statesman, and then on the side, he's coming up with statements like this. That's profoundly important for a number of reasons, like I said, which I'm not going to reveal to you yet. Okay, so far we've looked at a few sayings, and for whatever they're worth, they seem to be quotable quotes. What would we call these sayings in English? Now, we call them sayings, but there's a technical term that we would use. It's on the tip of your tongues. Not affirmations so much. Yes, aphorisms. Yes, good. Yeah, from the Greek aphorismos, right, which means like a statement, right? In this sense, it's a kind of affirmative thing. The etymology of the Greek word has to do with boundaries, right? You're delineating an idea, a concept, and putting it into a kind of space where you can, define things and bring out their meaning and separate it from other possibilities. So aphorisms of this nature, they usually come with some kind of wise teaching. So the way aphorisms are generally used in different cultures, the things that we call aphorisms, I should say, they have to do with wisdom generally. If you look at any of the statements I quoted for you, none of these were stupid statements. They weren't silly. I mean, I'm sure if you went on YouTube, you can find you can type in stupid aphorisms. I'm sure you'd find them. I haven't looked, but I guarantee you it's there. There might even be a person performing them for all that we know. But generally, when we think of aphorisms, culturally, they have to do with some kind of wisdom. It's usually encapsulated in few words, like we've seen. So they're short statements. And they normally convey something that's not just wise, but deep and profound. So it's not just some kind of like average everyday saying, but it has some kind of relationship to your comportment with the world, the way you're going to move around in the world, maybe some guidance that you might need, maybe some advice that you may need to heed to, so on and so forth. Now, if I were to say to you that every culture has these kinds of statements, you would not be surprised based on that statement if I were to say also that Islam is no different, particularly the Sufi tradition, right? That there are statements just like that by people who called themselves Sufis, and also people who didn't call themselves Sufis. So that's not surprising. For this crowd, this is not, I don't need to like convince you of that. If it was a different crowd, I'd have to like spend like 30 minutes like convincing them that Muslims said intelligent things, right? And then from there I'd move, right? Which is too bad. But here you guys all understand that this is normal. Of course, Muslims have said intelligent things. They've said many intelligent things. And now he's giving me 2 microphones. No? I'm okay? All right. So now, it's interesting because the word aphorism, as I defined it for you, it comes from this Greek term that means like a definition or something that's kind of, like delineated and put into a boundary. The word in Arabic that we would use to convey the same idea of an aphorism, can anybody share with me? What do you think it would be? Again, there are many terms, but there's one that stands out. Yeah, wow, I wasn't expecting. Well, so that's a plural, right? Hikam is the plural. Good. So the word is hikam, but the singular is hikmah. Hikmah, right? Which means wisdom, and it can mean many things. It can mean philosophy, it can mean medicine in some contexts. But the idea is that, it's some kind of knowledge that's beyond the everyday knowledge that we're used to. It comes from a kind of rootedness. But the word hikam or hikmah, it comes from an Arabic word that doesn't have to do with defining and delineating. It's very interesting. It has to do with control and holding on to something. So in that sense, it's a kind of delineating and defining, but it also is related deeply to self-control, right? Like the hakam, for example, they use that for the reins on the human ego to hold yourself back, for example. No problem. How many devices do I have on me right now? I'm not even sure. He's giving me, I might have like 3 things here. I must look ridiculous right now. You put them on my ears for So This word is very interesting because it tells you something about how Arabs, Persians, Turks, historically Muslims, have looked at what wisdom is. The thing that we call wisdom has to do with control. It has to do with restraint, and it has to do with the kind of ability to place yourself in a discussion that's beyond everyday, regular, discursive knowledge. There's a kind of knowledge that's a little bit above the average kind of knowing, but it comes from a different place. You can't just wake up and make a wise statement, a hikmah statement. In the classical tradition, you'd be called a fraud if you did that. Nobody would just, you'd have to be a very special kind of person to even claim to be able to make these kinds of statements, which is why it's interesting. Muslims, for as brilliant as they were in the poetic tradition, in prose, and all of these different modes of communication, they wrote comparatively few aphoristic books. There are many actually, but you would think that for a civilization that has maybe over 8 million texts, there's a relatively small number of those that you'd call aphorisms, the whole genre of aphorisms. It's a very, very controlled number. That's interesting. And part of the reason is because they understood historically that wisdom, it comes from God. He gives it, as the Quran says, he gives it to whoever he wants. وَمَنْ يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا, the verse says, right? Whoever has been given wisdom has been given abundant good. At the same time, the Quran says, وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِثْ. As for your Lord's blessings, declare them. So they thought, if I have wisdom, I should declare them. But it really depends on the manner in which they're doing the declaring. Some of them didn't necessarily declare them in words. They declared them in their actions, in their being. The Muslims would historically always pick the declaration in their body and in their lived practice more than in writing. That's why it's amazing. As I was mentioning, all these great Sufi texts that we know about, all these great philosophical texts, that's a drop in the ocean of the common heritage of the Islamic intellectual and spiritual tradition. That's all that's come down to us in writing. That's all that's survived in writing, I should say, because a lot of things haven't survived. But the real knowledge has been passed, as they say, from chest to chest, from sadr ila sadr, right? So in that, vast kind of expanse of all of this literature, there's a small group of texts that we can refer to as aphorisms, many of whom decided to declare God's blessings in this way by doing this kind of writing. They did it with a very careful purpose in mind. Number one, you had to be a very skilled user of the language you were writing. Usually they were in Arabic. But to come up with an Arabic aphorism, it's very difficult. That is to say, even if you're very skilled at writing in Arabic, it's kind of like writing an Arabic poem. If you're not trained in the classical tradition, it's very difficult to make up your own poem. You have to know the meter you're writing in. You have to be able to do all of these things. But you could, in theory, just be good with words and get away with it. But with aphorisms, it's not like that. I remember one time I have a relative who I won't mention once tried to come up with an aphorism in English, and I looked at this person and I thought that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my whole life. It sounded good, but when you unpacked it, it was actually ridiculous. It didn't even make it. I don't know what that was. Okay, good. So we have here, therefore, a kind of art form that's really underappreciated. Aphoristic writing amongst Muslims, which has not been extremely common, as I mentioned. When it did happen, it was a very exalted form of writing. Okay, now this thing's kicked in. Now I can hear like myself 4 times. Is that normal? It is. Okay. Okay. Can you guys hear me? Okay. So now, of these treatises, generally speaking, the ones that really count as or are counted as having been the most important aphoristic kinds of works. This is again apart from poetry, which has an aphoristic quality to it. My personal favorite, it's known as the Kitab al-Mawaqif by Annemarie, very famous author, Arabic author from Iraq, enigmatic figure. He wrote these really mysterious sayings. They were mysterious because they're about him and his encounter with God. God stops him at this a station of, let's say, repentance, and he addresses him directly, and he's reporting it. And then sometimes it's God speaking directly to him, but through him on his tongue. And those are, you know, they have a certain element of shock effect to them. Like Professor William Chittick once said, characterizing them, he said that he was certainly also trying to like trip up his readers, you know, like he's definitely putting it out there in ways that are very unusual. You'd have to really think about them. They have an aphoristic quality to them, but they're a little bit harder to walk away with. So I thought of sharing some of them with you, and then I thought, no, that's going to be, you know, there's too much legwork that's required to be able to get to them. I do hope one day that can happen, but maybe on another occasion. But so that's just to mention that the aphorisms of Annemarie, or what we refer to as aphorisms, they're extremely special in the tradition. And one of the key things there is that you're not sure who's doing the speaking most of the time, right? It's a very, very exalted form of writing. And then you have many of the sayings of Sufis that you find in historical texts, in biographical literature, in sayings of the saints across the generations, the friends of God. And those are like recorded, you know, usually one-liners, something like this. One of my favorite is they ask Kharraz, the Sufi master, where is the mystic? And he says, or where is the recognizer of God? He says, he was here and he departed. So that has definitely an aphoristic kind of quality to it. It's beautiful. It captures you, right? It intrigues you. There's definitely control. There's definitely some kind of wisdom that's being imparted. And it also causes you to reflect on a knowledge that's not part of the everyday. So it fulfills at least the criteria that I've laid out. But again, it's still difficult to kind of like get something from that other than a wow, right? So we need to find aphorisms in the tradition that have more of a direct message for the reader, something that was relevant back then and ideally right now. It would be very difficult for me to, let's say, guide my children if they come to me and say, what's knowledge about? And I say to them, well, it's, you know, you get it, and then once you become characterized, then you depart. They'd be like, what are you talking about, right? Has to be something a little bit more palpable. And for sure, there are many, many forms of writing in Islamic civilization that have done this, but nothing that has been as palpable and appropriate and fitting than a one particular set of writings of aphorisms. Can anybody guess which one I would have in mind? Because when you think of aphorisms in Islamic civilization, this is generally the text that comes to mind, because it's the most popular historically, and there's very good reason for that, as I hope to impress upon you this late afternoon. Can anybody, what would this text be? Well, you kind of know because you actually said it. Yeah. The Hikam ibn Atayla. Good. Great. So Ibn Atayla, some of you may have heard about him. He was a very, very famous Sufi master. He died in the year 1309 of the Common Era. And if anyone's ever been to Cairo, you would see he has a beautiful, beautiful tomb there. And he was a major Sufi figure, a spiritual master of the Alexandrian branch of the Shadiliya order. And he wrote a number of important books on the spiritual life, on giving up your self-governance, on Sufi biography, on how to live a life that's fulfilling in the truest sense of the term by actualizing your servanthood. That's really what his perspective is. And we're lucky because Fons Vitae, the well-known publisher, they have a whole Ibn Ata'illah series. If they've been having books of this great master come out in English over the last 20 years. And there are others that are coming too, which is wonderful. So he wrote a number of important texts. He was a legal scholar. He was a great lover of God, and he was above and beyond all else, a very wise human being, somebody who we would refer to as a recognizer of God, an arif billah, or more appropriately, a recognizer through God, right? Somebody who came to recognize the realities of things as they are, not through himself, but through the divine self. Now, he distilled all of this wisdom of his, or at least what he wanted to share with us, in this book that you'd mentioned. It's called the Kitab al-Hikam, the book of aphorisms. There's many ways you can translate that. I like the word, I like wise sayings. That's the one that I liked. And again, I got that from Professor Chirek. I wish I could make that up, but no, it always goes back to him. But we're going to stick with aphorisms because it seems to be the one that That's the title that I'm going with in my translation of this for some reasons. And it's, of course, it's been recognized from a very early period in Islamic civilization as being precisely that kind of a book that offers guidance to people. It has been commented upon over 100 times in different languages, historically speaking, mostly commentaries in Arabic, but I found a really cool commentary on it in Persian from 19th century India, 20th century India, and I've even seen a Kurdish commentary upon it. So it's been, it's been commented upon. Generally speaking, if you see a lot of commentaries on a book historically in Islamic civilization, it means it was a popular book, obviously, right? Just like if you see a lot of manuscripts of a text, right, then you know that people were copying it for a reason. If it wasn't popular, then nobody would care about it. But if it had something to offer, then people would say something about it. A text like this, it has so much to offer that one of the greatest authors in the tradition, Ahmad Zaruq, who was a great Sufi master, he wrote, it is said, between 10 and 15 different commentaries upon it. And I've examined about 3 of them, and I can tell you they're very different. Like he approaches them extremely differently. It's wonderful. How much could you possibly get out of a text like that? Well, it comes from a source that's beyond the author. So therefore, it has an inexhaustible number of possibilities in terms of the human interaction with it. And what these aphorisms amount to are, short, relatively short sayings. I mean, in terms of words, it would come out to maybe about 7,000, 6,000 words in Arabic. So it's a very, very small little book. And he wrote them with no particular order to them or any numbering. He just literally as they came to him, he just put them down. And you would assume that this probably took just a few days. That's kind of the sense that I get, because they're really like flashes of lightning. They're extremely beautiful. And one of the arguments that I'm trying to make in this work that I've been doing on it is that not only does it need to be translated, but it needs to kind of the way it says what it's trying to say in the Arabic needs to come across in the English, because then you'll kind of get like the full impact of the statement. See, sometimes translation is a strange thing, because if you translate a text, you're getting the meaning across, but you might not get across the how of the way the author said it. If you can do that, then that's a great accomplishment. And especially if the how, it's so closely tied to the meaning. So here, form and meaning come very close together. This is why translating poetry is so difficult, as my brother here knows, right? Especially when you get into Hafiz, how are you ever going to translate that properly, right? Hafiz, Persian poetry, that the form itself is the meaning on one level. It captures everything, and even to the point that he's using the letters themselves they themselves are playing on the page. It's incredible. So there's nothing like that here. There's no fun word plays like that in the hikam, but there's a principle in Arabic kind of a rhetoric. It's called tanaqud, where he'll make a statement and then it won't contradict the other part of the first part of the statement, but it'll basically kind of problematize it, somewhat contradicted, and then there was like a resolve at the end. That's a very common way his aphorisms work. So they're a little bit different from the ones that I shared with you at the beginning in English. Those are very purpose-based, right? Slow and steady wins the race, for example, right? Something like that. You cannot judge a book by its cover. These kind of, sometimes they have that form to them, but they're usually there to say, all right, you listen now to me. That's more or less what they're like. And then if you can listen, fine. If you want to get just some nice Arabic literature out of it, he says, I can give that to you too, but don't walk away with just the words, right? It should really hit you. And they really do have that sense of just hitting the heart. That's generally what they're meant to do. And it quickly registers, it might hit you intellectually, but then slowly you'll realize that you can kind of internalize them, or you should. And if you feel like you need to, then maybe you should go, write a commentary on it, or at least read one of the commentaries on it, because that's how many authors felt when they read it. They thought, hey, there's a lot going on here. And I would not recommend anybody to read the commentarial literature. Number one, none of it exists in English, so that's probably good for you. And the reason is because a lot of the commentaries come from the different perspectives of the authors themselves. And that's good, but part of the directness of the text like this for our times is he also wants us to engage with it on our level first, right? The commentary is like a second place you would go for further clarification and elucidation. If you have the ability to do that, and his way is to say you do have the ability to do that. You can cultivate that kind of what they call in Persian sam-e batini, the inner hearing. You can do it. It just takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of fine-tuning of your intelligence to be able to be in his world. So what I thought we'll do today is kind of try to step in Ibn Ata'illah's world a little bit. And I picked, so the aphorisms, if you were to number them, there's different ways to number them, but they come out to about 262. That's the commonly accepted enumeration of them. And there are many translations, by the way, of the hikam. In English alone, there are like at least 15 of them. And they came out, the first one came out in 1932 in some kind of Orientalist journal, you know, like the Royal Asiatic Society kind of thing. But the one that made the hikam very popular and Ibn Atta'illah popular was that of the late great Islamicist Victor Danner, who did a first edition in 1973. He translated them in English, and he was immersed in the Arabic Islamic Sufi tradition. He knew the commentarial literature very well. He consulted the commentarial literature when he did his translation, so there's a sense of like authenticity to it that you don't get in other translations for sure. And then he redid it in 1978. He did like another edition, and that's the one that's commonly available. He fixed up some things, and I think his idea was to make it more readable for contemporary audiences. Contemporary, I mean back then in the 70s. There weren't too many Sufi books available in English back then. Today, we're very lucky because we have so many things that you can read and you can compare to. And we also have the magisterial work of people like the aforementioned Professor Chittick, who's worked out technical terminology in a way that can benefit us greatly, and that wasn't available to someone like Victor Danner. So I admire his translation so much, not because of its pioneering efforts only, but because he really had to like grapple with a lot of the Arabic terminology for which there wasn't really a good English translation. And he had to kind of like make up his own path here. And what's unique about this man's translation is that it has colored everyone else's interaction with Ibn Atta'illah's aphorisms for the next 50 years. Anyone who writes on the hikam or tries to take their hand at translating it has to go back to Danner. What I'm going to present to you here, it's radically different, actually. And I've tried this, on colleagues, younger colleagues, but also colleagues and friends who grew up reading the Danner translation. I was one of those people. And some people were very put off at the beginning. They're like, wait a second. It's kind of like orthodoxy. You can't go against Victor Danner's translation. What are you doing? But I have a little, a few tricks up my sleeve too. And I can say things like, yes, but Carl Ernst translates this term like this, and William Chittick translates it like this. So we have a lot more precedent for, these kinds of new ways of thinking about the terminology and being more actually consistent and more precise terminologically. So I'm going to present them to you, and what I did out of the 262 is I picked like, I don't know, maybe 20 of them. I thought we can just go through them. Maybe I'll read the Arabic. Do you want me to read the Arabic? I mean, I've made this whole case for why the Arabic is important, so I guess I should read the Arabic. I have the Arabic, right? Yeah, okay, I have it. That's good. At one point, I didn't have the Arabic, and now it showed up on the page, so that's good. So I'll read the Arabic. I think we'll try to go through most of them. You can divide these aphorisms up thematically, and I kind of didn't want to be very systematic in doing this because a lot of them flow into the others. So I picked ones that had kind of a unity, like overall, and I guess the theme that would connect all of them for us today as contemporary audiences is the importance of cultivating self-awareness, which is, the name of the game, right? Mindfulness, they call it, apparently, right? Here, Ibn Atta'illah wouldn't call it mindfulness. He would call it, if there was a word that he would give to it, he'd call it heartfulness, actually. What is the mind? Where is the mind? I always tell my students, where is the mind? We lose our minds all the time, but where is it? There it is. It walked out the door. It's getting a cup of coffee. What is a mind, right? Philosophers of science don't know what a mind is, right? So it's difficult. It's a kind of very abstract concept. But a heart, we all have one, and we all know one, and we all lose one at a certain point. So that's something much more directly related to our perception of reality on a biological level. And of course, the heart, for people like this, it has everything to do with the inner recesses of their consciousness, right? What is referred to as the secret core, the sir of a person, the inner dimension of the person, the andaruni of the person, the andaruni, the real inner innards of the individual. So that's one theme. Another theme that we're gonna explore here is that of life, of how to live a life that's meaningful and how to live in the present moment and to not do what so many people tell us all the time not to do, but we find ourselves doing it, dwell on the past, or worry about the future. Speaking of which, let me share another one with you, by the way, about worrying about the future. This is an aphorism that's popular, somewhat popular in English. It goes back to the Buddha, but it's not by the Buddha. But it's been made popular as a Buddhist saying in American Buddhism, if you want to call it that. But it's beautiful, and it really conveys much of what Ibn Ata'illah is going to be telling us. Listen to this one. In the end, only three things matter: how much you loved. Anyone ever see that movie, Eat, Pray, Love? Oh, I really don't like that film. But don't just get that out of your mind here. But how much you loved, all right? How much you loved, how gently you have lived, and how gracefully you let go of the things that were not meant for you. Oh, that's nice, right? And in many ways, what's not meant for you, it is other people's lives. That's one part of it. But it also is your own past. It's not meant for you, it's gone. And it's your future, which is not meant for you because it hasn't happened yet. What is meant for you is where you are right now. So that's saying that, we can spend a good deal of time unpacking that, but I'm going to take the easy route. I'm going to let Ibn Ata'illah more or less comment on it for us. So I'm going to just basically dive into these, and we can keep this light. I can read some of them. If you want, you can read them, and we can kind of just, have a conversation around them. Are there any questions before we move into this? You're all following me, right? It's straightforward stuff. This is easy. This is all stuff you already know. That's the beauty of it, right? We all have known it, and these texts basically just are there to activate a reminder, right? That's what this is all about. It's just a reminder. That's what, Plato has his doctrine of anamnesis, right? All knowledge that you have, it's recollection of a knowledge you already knew. That's exactly what marifat is, right? Translated as recognition. That is to recognize something that you've already had, but that you lost because you came in the world and you forgot. Like your father, Adam, all right? He forgot. Shams Tabrizi says the difference between our father Adam and us is that he forgot only once. Us, we keep forgetting. That's why we need to get reminded constantly. Okay, so here we go. We'll start with the light one. ما من نفس تبديه إلا وله قدر فيه يمضيه. You see, there's the tanaqud. You're a reader of Arabic. Yeah, some of you would. Who here is a user of Arabic? Maybe that's a good way to. You said Kitab al-Hikam ibn Ata'illah like you knew. Okay, but you do understood that. I mean, if you understand it, that's good. But it's kind of meant to evoke in you. Hey, I know all the words, the individual words, but what's he actually saying? Let me read it again, and then we'll unpack it. ما من نفس تبديه, that is تبديه, إلا وله قدر فيه أفيك يمديه. You do not take a breath, but that it leaves a portion of you behind. I don't want to compare all the different translations that are out there of that, but if you read the different translations on these important ones, you find that, wow, it's as if we're reading two totally different, so if what he's actually saying here is very interesting, right? That is to say that we associate ourselves with our bodies, more or less. We associate ourselves with our living conscious being. And it's interesting because on one level, that same individual who was once a cute baby walking around and who's now, a grown adult, 30 years old, that the conscious awareness of that person, there's been a continuity, right? There's debates in some literatures about about the stream of consciousness as it continues. But for the most part, we can say what has happened is maturity, physical maturity, intellectual maturity, so on and so forth. But it's the same conscious being. And we tend to associate our own selves with that conscious individual, whatever and however you want to frame it, which is fine and understandable. And if you're not reading hardcore Buddhist texts, then you will probably be, on the same page with me, that you are that same you that you were 15 years ago. Maybe not the same person, but it is you, right? The reason you can go back and have recollection is because of your memory, which is tied to your awareness and so on and so forth. And we associate ourselves with that person. We also associate ourselves, strangely enough, with a person who's coming in the future, who's not happened yet, actually. That's why we're works in progress, but we haven't really gotten there yet. But what that is it's not our memories, but it's our dreams, and it's our aspirations, and it's our hopes, and it's all of the things that we think we need and know and have to be. You'll see later on, he's going to get into the question of hope. It's my favorite one. But rarely do we associate our own selves with our conscious, living, present, breathing self. That's why everyone says, live in the present moment, breathe. And, people, they get angry, they learn it from, they watch some yoga videos, or these corporations, they realize that these people are, better employees if they take 5 minutes to breathe in the morning. So, but this makes for good productivity. Get them to all meditate, throw them in yoga class or something, right? That kind of thing. But if we pay attention to our breath, you'll note that everything is actually right there, right? Because what connects you to you right now, sure, it's your conscious awareness, but palpably speaking, it's your breathing self. That's the one thing that you can actually feel right now with you. Especially if you stop and you pay attention to it. It's a very unusual thing that's happening. And what's remarkable about it is that every time that happens, it's not, that particular one is not happening again. So it's like you're like walking on this path, and as you move along, all the steps you just taken just start kind of like falling away. You can't turn back. There's no turning back, because there's no path left. It's just you walking. But you can be present at that moment. If the more present you are to your breathing, the more present you are to your self-awareness, he's saying, and the more fortunate you are, because you recognize what's in front of you. That's the only thing that you can change. That's the only thing that matters to you. And then that's why he has that second part of it. So whatever has happened, it's not coming back to you. And so you've technically, in a sense, left a part of you behind. You've, in a sense, died, right? Like, people say, one way to think of it is to say, I'm living, I'm alive. But a more realistic way, actually, is to say, I'm dying, right? Because you're actually moving closer to death at every moment. So, right? You could say I'm alive, but that's a very relative statement, and it's kind of not true, right? It is, but it's maybe you can qualify by saying I'm alive towards death. And this does not sound, I don't want to sound like some weird existentialist, because they have these being unto death, and that's all kuf as far as these guys are concerned. None of that. He knows about this stuff. That's why. So the idea is to recognize that part of you that dies, whether it's been a good death or not, it's happening at every moment. But that's not actually who you are. So you associate yourself with yourself in your current breathing state, but that's not who you are going to be, and that's not who you actually were. Right now, it's somebody different. And then you move, and you keep breathing, and you keep moving like that. The minute you can cultivate a perspective like that, he tells us that you will, number one, not dwell on the past so much, because it's gone. That part of you is gone. And why torment yourself about what has happened in the past? Or why congratulate yourself about what has happened in the past? It's gone. And like those steps that vanish as you walk along, you can't actually recover it. So then what ends up happening for a lot of people is they end up kind of psychologically tormenting themselves by looking back at the past. Maybe they did something that they shouldn't have done, or maybe they said something that they shouldn't have said, or they fought with somebody that they shouldn't have fought with, or whatever the case may be. And that's fine. You can change. That's true, but don't sit there and dwell too much. Is one of the points that he's trying to make here. You're not gonna get that back. And so what matters more than anything is that part of you that is alive right now. That you is what you should hold on to. That you is not gonna be coming back to you too in a few moments. You're gonna lose that you, and you're gonna keep losing that you as you move along in life like this. Okay, good. So I'll stop there and we'll keep going. So far, so clear? Yeah, good. Yeah, of course. Anytime you can feel free at any point. Bismillah. Mm.
The Yomdi, right? Yomdi is
Yumdi. Yeah.
Yomdi.
Yeah. Yumdi, to remain. Or in this, literally, you there is not a breath that you display, that you let out, except for you there is a portion in you that you've made fika yumdi, that you've made it remain. It's kind of weird, but the idea is that you kind of you push it aside, right? It's the fourth form yumdi, right? You're making it you're making it you're making it stay back there, right? You're leaving it behind you, and then you just keep moving along. That's why in the translation it says here, but that it leaves a portion, qadr, of you behind. Right? Is that clear?
So is it a play on something being leading and lasting?
Yeah, always, yeah, because he says tubdi, right? You're putting it out there, and then yumdi, right? Exactly. And then of course the word nafas that he's using, the word for breath, there's so much happening there, right? It comes from a word in Arabic that has to do with something that's precious. Nafis is something that's precious, and also the human ego, the self, nafs, right? Because it's a reflexive noun, right? The self, but it also refers to kind of like the human ego, right? Because people think that they're precious, right? So, right, we think we're so, but and that's related to your own breath. The very thing that carries and prolongs your life is that breathing agent. But that breath of yours is not actually your breath. It comes from God's breath. This goes back to an Islamic cosmological teaching, right? Known as the breath of the All-Merciful. See, there's a very famous Sufi explanation that says that God, he generated the entire cosmic order by breathing out. That's known as the nafas al-Rahman. It comes from a hadith. He breathed out like that. And when God breathed out like this, all of the forms of being that came about are articulations within that breath of God. And so they're all little instances of mercy that come out from the divine breath. And then, of course, when the world comes to an end and everything goes back to God, God breathes back in, which is the rujur, it's the return. Everything goes back to God. So it makes sense that everything that has come out from the breath, the tubdi, then comes back, returns back to its original source. There's that famous Sufi saying, which is an aphorism too, kullu shay'in yarji'u ila aslihi. Everything returns back to its origin, right? If you take the Sufi individual sayings and you compile them as aphorisms, you can have tens and tens of books of aphorisms. This is the unique text in terms of aphoristic literature per se. Okay, good. Let's continue. This one, there's two ways to translate this one, and I had a lot of fun with this one. So I'll give it to you both ways, and you can let me know what you think, because I haven't decided on which one I'm gonna go with. Okay, so this one says, "Ma qadaka shay'un mithlul wahmi." Ma qadaka shay'un mithlul wahmi. It's translated usually as nothing leads you along except illusion or delusion, or however you translate it. Delusion would not be correct. Illusion is much more correct. Waham, illusion. Now, another way to translate it is nothing takes you for a ride. That's if you're making it in contemporary English, nothing takes you for a ride like illusion. It works perfectly well. I mean, it makes Ibn Ata'illah sound like he's, right? But I like it. I don't know. If I'm in a taxi and the guy is taking me for a ride, literally, going here and there, and even though the route's there, but he's just gone all the way that way to charge me more, I'd be like, hey, buddy, you're taking me for a ride, right? And it's used in English, of course, as you know, as an idiom, to fool, to lead on. And he's saying, look, whatever it is, this thing called illusion, which is always related to the ephemeral nature of reality, the fact that we don't have a proper control on things, the fact that our own lives are just shaped so much by the things that we think are going to happen or are not going to happen, and all of that's in the realm of just the illusory. Like I said, most of it's not going to happen. What does Mark Twain say? My favorite saying of Mark Twain's, half of my problems, I never even saw them, right? I guess that's an aphorism too, right? Half of my problems, I never even saw them. That's brilliant because, but most of that's just illusion. And then on the level of metaphysical reality, there's all kinds of illusions, right? Truths masquerading, things masquerading as truths when they're not, but raised to the level of fact. I always tell them, well, I'm not going to give you the examples that I give with my students because I don't want to open up a can of worms, but I always tell my students, look, certain scientific facts that you've been fed, they, according to the standards of modern science and of the ancients, it would be like more like illusion than it would be like actual fact, right? It's just we come to associate them with fact because of repetition and because of blind imitation and because of culture ultimately. But so you can think of illusion on many levels, metaphysically, physically, intellectually, and so on and so forth. And he's saying, look, the worst thing for you, the thing that's going to trick you the most, is this illusory nature of reality and your interaction with illusion at every level of your existence. So which one do you guys like? Do you like nothing leads you on like illusion? That's what I have right now. Nothing leads you on like illusion, or nothing takes you for a ride like illusion. I don't know which one speaks to you more. Nothing takes you for a ride? Yeah, yeah, you like that one? Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, if anyone's been, led on by their illusion, then yeah, no, absolutely. I originally, when I translated these, I tried to do them idiomatically like this. I tried my hand at about, I think I got to about maybe about had about 40 or 50 of them, where they were like purely idiomatic, and they worked very well. Actually, I was quite happy. But then I started realizing it became very illusory. Actually, I was being taken for a ride actually by idiom, and realizing that I'm actually fooling myself because in order to make it sound really, like English, you're actually losing a lot. And one of my great teachers is the one who opened my eyes to that, and bless him for that because at least that illusion for me ended. Okay, here's another one. أنت حر مما أنت عنه آيس وعبد لما أنت له طامع. So آيس and طامع, right? أنت حر مما أنت عنه آيس وعبد لما أنت له طامع. So this had to be done idiomatically because there's no meaningful way that you can translate that into English. Part of the reason is that he uses a word in Arabic, despair, but here it's a positive kind of despair. So you can never communicate that properly in English. There's a famous saying of the Prophet where he says, alayhi wasalam, where he says, "Wajma' al-yas mimma fi aydin nas." Literally, gather up despair concerning what's in people's hands, which means basically don't hope in people. Just have despair over the fact that they're going to be able to give you anything. It's an amazing saying. So despair is used like that. But here I had to be a little creative. So this is what I came up with. This is the most, also to retain the rhyme, or the play on the words ayas tamir, like this. You are free when you let go, but a slave when you crave. It actually works, right? Because abd, you're an abd, right? And that is to say, when you crave and hold on, when you follow your what they call your base desires, all fueled by what in Arabic is called the shahwa. Shahwat is the plural. Normally, that word is translated as desire. And it makes it look like, well, because the Sufis are always talking about breaking your shahwat. But there's nothing wrong with desire. Desire is a pretty normal thing, right? You should have desire to do things in the world. You should have desire for eating, for example. You should have desire to go do something good in the world. There's nothing wrong with desire. But the word shahwa doesn't mean desire. It actually means appetite. That's the way it's best translated. Again, these are none of these are my technical terms. These come from the established work of the masters in our profession. And an appetite works very well because everybody has them, and they go. They come and they go, right? The fool is the one who, after having satisfied their appetite, then tries to go satisfy that exact same appetite right when that one is done. Because, well, that's going to lead to unhealthiness. For example, if you have a big meal, you don't go have another big meal 2 seconds after that. You're going to harm yourself, right? Not to mention you might puke, right? So this idea of feeding this lower part of the self, it's closely related to the attention to your appetites in an unbridled way. And so he uses the word tama here, which has to do more with like a craving. So what makes you attached to the appetites in that way of excess, it has to do with this thing that we call craving, right? Wanting something and wanting it in a deep, deep way, usually because of ignorance. Going back again to that Buddhist theme, right? The fundamental Four Noble Truths, right? All things are suffering. Well, what's that suffering caused by? Ignorance, right? And that ignorance is fueled by your attachment and your desire for things, you're craving them. That's where the whole problem lies for every human being. All right, so there's a verse in the Quran that illustrates this very well, and it usually comes up in context like this. وَمَن يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Right? Allah Ta'ala says that whoever is saved from the shuh, in this case, shuh is like tama. It's like, you can even see in the word itself. It's not just craving, it's shuh. It's really, it has that sense. It's almost onomatopoeic, right? Shuh. Really like a desire, like a ball of just craving, sure, right? Whoever is saved from that the avarice of their nafs, of their ego, those are the ones who are successful, God says, right? They're the ones who are successful. So it's kind of like that. Tamar is like that, this kind of craving. So you're a slave when you crave. That's all. Straightforward. All right. Let me continue here. This one deals with action, which I like. Although it's a problem because it happens to a lot of people in their everyday lives. And when some people have tried to read these aphorisms as kind of like applying to like secular life, and that's fine, but Ibn Atta'illah was no secular man. He did not live through the Enlightenment or anything like that. And if anyone saw him, in our day and age, if anyone saw someone like him, they'd probably just die because he was just so overwhelming in his majesty. Just go to his tomb and you'll know what I mean. That alone is like, wow. But he himself was just this great, great luminous master, not a secular human being at all. So, the context in which he's addressing all of these points, they're very much in the realm of a spiritual life, right? And for a person who's practicing, who believes in God, who understands that they have an ego, and who's trying to resolve that, So he says here, or is it? إحالتك الأعمال على وجود الفراغ من رعنات النفس. I'll read it again. إحالتك الأعمال على وجود الفراغ من رعنات النفس. So you're putting off deeds, putting off a'mal or practices, the prayer, the fasting, all of the religious rites that Muslims perform. When you put them off, let's say it's time to pray and you say, I'll go do that in 30 minutes, not now. For whatever reason. Sometimes there's a legitimate reason, sometimes there isn't a legitimate reason. He means illegitimate times, right? When you're like, look, let me just finish that last clip on whatever I'm watching or something like that. You're putting off deeds for when you are free. I'll do this when I'm free. I'll make more zikr when I'm free. This time will never come. He says, when you're putting off deeds for when you are free is one of the tricks of the ego. Ru'unat nafs, right? Ru'ana is it's like a cause of you're getting fooled by something, right? The ru'unat. So the human ego has all of these tricks and barriers and psychological closets that it sets itself up into and backs itself into these corners on a daily level. And what he's saying is, well, you have the option here. You don't have to do that to yourself. And that's his function. His function is to remind us of what life's really all about. So don't put off things, spiritually speaking, that you should be able to do right now, because maybe that tomorrow won't come, right? It's too much of a futuristic view to say I'll do it later. I was just talking to somebody, yeah, it was a Sabah. Where's Sabah? We were just talking about procrastination yesterday, right? Remember the word procrastination, procrastinator. When we say procrastinate, I'm going to do something. I'm procrastinating. See, we use Latin terminology, first of all, and it becomes abstract. Now it's not so threatening. I'm just procrastinating, right? But look at the Arabic tasawwafa from sofa, right? Sofa. It means to say tomorrow, tasawwafa, to tomorrow it. Now all of a sudden it's like, wait, I can't tomorrow this thing. I gotta now it, right? So we got to put everything, back in concrete language, and you see what he's speaking about. It's very much pertinent to our own experience of life, on all levels. At the highest level, of course, of the remembrance of God, the dhikr. How many accounts do we have of people who, at the end of their lives, they thought to themselves, "Geez, I wish I spent more time reading Quran." A friend of mine, he used to work with, people who were in the last moments of their lives. He goes, spend time with them, read Quran to them, just sit with them and just be with them. Usually they didn't have family or whatever, people didn't come to them. And I asked him once, I said, so what's their biggest regret? What's their biggest regret? And a lot of them, which is common, I think a lot of you guys have probably seen this, in these self-help books and things like this. They say, well, to spend time with loved ones. That's big up there on the list of regrets for people, because you miss those opportunities, and that kind of thing. But the greater than that, even for especially the religiously minded individual, is the time spent in remembering God, right? And that's the only thing the Sufis tell us that we'll remember anyway when we die, is how much you remember God. That's all that matters, right? And in the end, everything else is irrelevant. All that matters is if you prepared yourself properly for that moment, and ideally died even before that moment of physical death, right? So that when death comes, it just becomes, as they say, like taking off one garment and putting on another. It's that simple. I remember Ibn Arabi, one time he wrote a letter to this great philosopher named Fakhruddin al-Razi, and he said to him, you're a great man, you have all this intelligence, but you live too much in your head. And Razi was a very pious, great spiritual human being too, but he's, Ibn Arabi's Ibn Arabi. He can talk to whoever he likes like this. And if he had a problem with Razi, then there's a problem with Razi. So he said to him, look, all this intellectual stuff you're doing, this is the easy stuff. That's how hard is that? You just go get a degree, you read some books. Come on. What you really got to do is you got to walk. You got to do the way of suluk. You have to do the zikr. You have to die to yourself. And he said the most amazing part of this was, he said to him, you need to become so familiar with the afterlife like you are familiar with your home when you walk around. It needs to be that familiar to you. And this is the saying of Hazrat Ali, as you know. He said, I know the hubuk of the sama better than I know the hubuk of this dunya. He says, I know the pathways in the skies and in the heavens and the inner life better than I know the ones here. I one time, just to give you some context, I'm a very bad driver amongst many things. And I've never gotten into an accident, thankfully, but I just mindlessly will drive and pass my house, and it drives my wife nuts. And one time this happened, and she said, I can't believe this still happens in places where, you live here, you live here, you drive past the house. I said to her, look, there's this saying of Hazrat Ali. He says, I know the hubuk of the akhirah, and she says, yeah, but you don't know those pathways, and you're not Ali, so you're not allowed to say this. She had a very good point. Okay, let's continue. This one, so if you look at thematically what we've done so far, right? We've talked a little bit about action, about the value of life, about the fact that we should let go, not crave, not hold on, right? The fact that illusion needs to be overcome. How is it supposed to happen? Now we can look at some of his sayings where he deals with the question of practice and how to resolve this problem of yourself. So there are two here that are pertinent, and I'll share them both with you. This one says, ما نفع القلب شيء مثل عزلة يدخل بها ميدان فكرة. ما نفع القلب شيء مثل عزلة يدخل بها ميدان فكرة. Nothing benefits the heart like seclusion. عزلة, being away from people. Literally pulling yourself away, out, detaching yourself from society. Physically, actually. And also intellectually, but also there needs to be a time when it's just for you. You know, you should don't let people intrude. I mean, we have all these devices that almost guarantee that this cannot ever happen, but it can, because there's a thing that I learned on my phone. It's called airplane mode. You just go to airplane mode and you just press that, and no one bothers you. It's great. So you can do it. Nothing benefits the heart like seclusion. Through it, the heart enters the field of reflection. So he's saying, right, there's a whole world of, there's this whole other space actually. And it's not anywhere outside of you, it's right inside of you. It's with you. So you can withdraw physically, something you need to for sure do that, at least for a little while. Eventually, you can withdraw all the time. In Persian, the Sufi saying, they call that khalwat al-anjuman, right? The solitude in a crowd, where you can be, you know, with people, but be totally with God internally. But maybe at the beginning, this is not so easy to cultivate. So you got to kind of, you know, then, you know, it doesn't have to be something drastic. You can just go walk in a forest, for example, be with nature. It's a beautiful place to be alone. Sure, maybe you want to have a buddy come with you or have an app that monitors the steps you're taking. That's all nice, but you need time for you too. Just walk away and be in that seclusion. He says, when that happens, you know, your heart, it enters into this other space. And there's all kinds of really interesting things that you begin to learn, first of all, about yourself. And then you start to monitor all of the thoughts that come to you. When you're alone, the thoughts that come to you are very different from if you're just always busy, you know, around people in the din of society and that kind of thing. Sometimes when you're alone, those thoughts are disturbing. You're like, where did that idea come from? Why am I feeling this way? But you need to do that. You need to go through that, monitor it, see for yourself what's there. Eventually, you recognize you're not any of those things. It's all just illusion. You take it, cast it aside. Take it, cast it aside. Eventually, you can enter into that maidan of fikr, that vast space of total reflection, total integration, tafakkur, right? Meditative inwardness with God. So now that is to be complemented with another of his aphorisms, which I'll share with you here. He says, الفكرة سراج القلب فإذا ذهبت فلا إضاءة له. الفكرة سراج القلب فإذا ذهبت فلا إضاءة له. Reflection is the heart's lamp. When it goes out, it can never be rekindled. So I'll read that again because some of you may have missed the English. Reflection is the heart's lamp. When it goes out, it can never be rekindled. So, of course, that is to say that you have to always keep that flame alive. You don't want to ever lose yourself so that you can never regain yourself. This would be, you know, the whole purpose of human life for someone like Ibn Atali would be missed completely if you lost yourself. But we have enough sense as human beings that when we lose ourselves to go after it. We do. I think most people have a good opinion of human beings for the most part. Even really bad people, you know, sometimes they just have to go through terrible things. Maybe they do terrible things to people or to themselves, but a lot of them do realize eventually, maybe it's too late, but there is a realization that, hey, you know, I shouldn't have been like that. But sometimes they have to kind of go through that to actualize these other possibilities that are inside of them. So in many ways, sometimes you can do something really bad and it can be a catalyst for much good later on. But in the moment, it's terrible what you've done or what you've thought or what you've said or whatever. But later on, you can look back and be like, well, I'm kind of needed to go through that. I'm kind of happy that that happened. Not happy that I did something bad to somebody, but happy that at least now I'll make sure that never happens again. And hey, maybe I can go become friends with that person too, right? Sometimes it is the case that someone who's a bitter enemy, like the Quran says, right? Later on, كَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ. He can become like a very, very close, intimate friend of yours. The same person that you were fighting with can the next day become like a very, very close friends. Very possible. So the trick here is reflection. You need to go through a little bit of reflection and to do that in a consistent way. So this aphorism is really trying to capture the importance of not just, entering into a space of reflective behavior once in a while, but it should be something constant. You want to do it regularly so that you don't lose your momentum and then let that flame go out. Okay. Are you all with me so far? Following me? Good. All right. Oh yeah, this one's amazing. Look at this one. So the context for this is that people usually ask, especially when it comes to people who are interested in quote unquote spiritual matters, is what am I supposed to do? I go read all these Sufi books. I hear all of these teachers on YouTube, and they always tell me to do stuff. And usually it's the opposite. One guy will tell me this, one sheikh will say this, one teacher will say this, and at the end I'm like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. I really don't know. I'm not sure. And then sometimes they lose their momentum like that, or they get confused, or they start like, hey, maybe I'm just going to do a little bit of everything of what they told me to do. And then in the end, they lose their all that gusto, right, that they entered with because they're doing too much. So it is possible to do too much, especially in the modern world, right? It's very difficult. In the olden days, some of these great awliyas, these great friends of God, they'd have 6 hours of zikrs after Fajr prayer, 6, 7 hours, 4 hours, 3 hours, right? Here we're lucky, if you can pray 5 times a day in a clean place, and this is itself a miracle, actually, right? And then have maybe a few moments where you can kind of turn inward and just turn away from the din and the ugliness and the noise of the self and of society. Very important. So what are you supposed to do? And the answer to that is that, well, you have to do what you have to do. But what is that thing? That's really the issue. What do I have to do? I know I have to do something, and the thing I need to do is that thing, but what is that thing? And this is where you're going to get all kinds of different opinions and however the case may be. And then, of course, if you end up with the wrong people, you might end up with people who will be giving you this advice and charging you something for it too, right? Well, what you need is this 9-week course in self-realization. You pay me $6,000 and I'll make sure you get that. And then you're not doing things. You're losing actually a lot of your time and your resources. So what are you supposed to do? And of all the answers that I've read where somebody tells you what you need to do, I think this is probably the clearest exposition that I've ever found. And it's in this one-line aphorism. And by the way, the thing I didn't mention about aphorisms is that they really facilitate memorization, right? Like a lot of these are, and they're memorized across the Muslim world, often even by people who are not Sufis, right? Like this, the Arabic of this text, it's so universal that it's kind of like a piece of world literature, really. And so you'll find a lot of people who I don't like Sufism, and then they'll quote Ibn Ata'illah, and they won't even know who he is. They're like, but this great scholar Ibn Ata says, and then you're like, oh my God, he's like one of the biggest Sufis. Okay, look at this one. This is what you need to do. You need to ask God. So that's the first step, right? There's a background to this. You have to ask God. Why? Because you don't know. So rather than sit and create a little, room in your mind and say, what am I going to do? See, when you do that, you're putting all the agency back into yourself. But it's not freedom of the self, it's freedom from the self. You're the problem. That's the issue, right? When Bastami, the great Sufi master, sees God in a dream and says, how do I come to you? And with the famous saying, utruk nafsak wa ta'al. Leave yourself and come. So you have to step away from you. Like there's this one Naqshbandi Indian sheikh, he says, annihilation is when you go, and subsistence is when God comes. That's all. It's straightforward. You just have to go, basically. You have to leave. And so you can't be the criteria for anything, right? There's too much of you. And for a lot of people, this Sufism is a dead end right there, because it's like, wait, what about me? I thought this is about me. And now you're telling me it's not about me? Well, the Sufi answer is, it is about you, but which you are we talking about? Right? Certainly not the you that you identify as you, that little breathing individual who you identify with every moment. You're just passing by in a cluster of imaginal memories in the past. Not that you, the other you, the real you. So you have to ask God. And what are you going to ask God? You're going to ask God to help, right? You're going to ask God to help you. There was a friend of mine one time. I might have told some of you this story, but if you've heard it, then it's okay. You can hear it again. Or maybe you've never heard it. There's a friend of mine many, many years ago. He was in a lot of trouble, and something bad was happening in his life. And he went to his master, and he said to him, I'm in all this trouble. I need help. Can you tell me some prayers that I can say to God tonight that'll help me? So the master gave him all these prayers, and he went home and he recited them. Then he comes back a few days later, and then the sheikh says, "So did you recite the prayers?" And he said, "Yes, but nothing happened. In fact, the situation's gotten worse." Right? So he said, "Okay, recite these prayers," and he gave him a new list of prayers to recite. He goes and does that. Comes back, same thing. Situation's pretty much the same. And then finally, months pass like this, and he comes and goes, "Look, none of this is working." And so the master is there with him, and there's all these disciples around, and he says to him, "Come here." So he takes him in a room, he closes the door, and he says to him, "Okay, you should go home. Stand in front of God in whatever way you want to stand, and say, 'Hey, man, throw me a bone. Just help me out here.'" And he said, "Just say it in any way. Just give me a hand, And so the master, basically, he was saying, look, after all of these possibilities have been exhausted, all of them, they brought something out in you. Now you're at a critical mass. What you have to do is you have to ask God from the inner recesses of yourself. So no formula is going to work here. Just come with who you really are. And one of the great gifts of the Quran is that if you pay attention to any situation in which somebody's in trouble in the Quran, I've never, this is kind of like an observation. I've not studied it systematically, so it might not always be the case, but I'm pretty sure it is, I think, most of the time. Especially the prophets, different prophets. Whenever they're in trouble, there's a beautiful prayer that they make to God. And usually they manifest a kind of state of helplessness. Like Noah, for example, right? He's overcome by his people. Inni maghlubun fantasir. I'm overcome. Please help me. It's beautiful. And then the response, فَفَتَحْنَا عَلَيْهِ أَبْوَابًا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ بِمَاءٍ مُنْهَمِرٍ. Right? We opened up the floodgates from heaven with just torrential rain just falling upon him. Moses is like that too, right? He's cast out of his out of Egypt, right? He's in the outskirts. He killed a man. He's a fugitive. He has nothing, no possessions, nothing. He needs a family. He needs a wife. He sees Jethro's daughters, and right away he turns to God, and he doesn't start coming up with like, what am I going to do here? How am I going to strategize to? He just inni bima anzalta ilayya min khairin faqir. He says, "Oh God, I am completely in need. I'm a faqir concerning whatever it is that you want to give me." So he just turns to God. The prophetic model is always one of total submissiveness to the divine will. Let God do the guiding. All you need to do is ask, and even that part, you'll see that what it is that you should be asking, that you're not even really sure about. So you need to ask him for something, but it cannot be on your terms. It has to be on God's terms. And so that's the context for this hikam. Now, this is what he says. خير ما تطلبه منه ما هو طالبه منك. خير ما تطلبه منه ما هو طالبه منك. The best that you can ask of him is what he asks of you. There you have it. You want to know what to do? You want to know what to ask God? Well, look at what he's asking you. The things that he's telling you to ask of him, that's the thing you should be asking of him. And that's the thing you should be then doing, of course, because he's not just asking you a question, right? You need to respond to that call. So that's straightforward, right? The best that you can ask of him is what he asks of you, and he'll open up the way. All right. Now this is the one on hope that I mentioned earlier. الرجاء ما قارنه عمل. وإلا فهو أمنية. الرجاء ما قارنه عمل وإلا فهو أمنية. Hope is linked with deeds, doing. You can't just hope in God. You have to do something about it. Otherwise, it is wishing. All right. And you can, you can think of the applications in one's life here. How many times you want something to happen. We're talking about the divine human relationship, but it also works in every other relationship in the world. But how many times do you want something from God or ask God of something and you have hope that it's going to come and but you've done nothing about it actually, right? But you expect it. Why do you expect it? Because you're so good that God has to respond to you. That's the underlying thought really behind the ask. I deserve this. I'm so and so. I've done this and that. All the while, they're actually gifts that he's totally given to you. The aphorisms that we're not going to look at here today, but one consistent message in them, in those other ones, is that anything that you do, it's a gift from God that's been given to you. So you kind of owe God the gratitude for not just the gift that He's given you, but the fact that He's rewarding you through that very gift that He's given you. So you're like doubly indebted to God, right? It's like He's compensating you. He'll give you all of these, you know, promised rewards in this world and the next world, but the thing that you're using to receive this compensation, they're all the talents and abilities and resources and everything that actions that He allowed you to do. And then He says that itself, the very fact that you can do those things itself actually is the reward. That is the reward from God. But we don't see it like that. Usually we think God owes us something actually, right? Which is al-Ghazali has a whole discussion about how that's actually a kind of ego and pride, right? God owes me. Who are you that God should give you anything actually? So I hoped and it didn't happen. I prayed so hard and this thing didn't happen. So the what's implied also is that God's not answering you. Maybe it is, but it's not going to come on your terms. Maybe it'll be later. Maybe there was something else deferred, a problem for you that you'd be happy that this thing didn't happen. There's so many possibilities. One time they asked this one great master this very question: why is it that I prayed so hard and I didn't get what I asked for? And he said, well, the question the person has not asked is, have they been praying correctly? Right? There's a way to come to God. How are you going to do it? What state are you in? Are you broken like that teacher that told my friend, hey man, and when you come to God like that, you're going to get whatever you asked for, I'm sure. Because that's it. That's God. He's this guy's. He said, I think he said to throw me a bone. I have no more options. I think that was the what a way to talk to God, right? I have no more options. This is it. This is the end. This is the end game here. This is my last card. So that's the way you should be with God. Just come to Him. Be completely you, and do something about it. Don't just pray properly and be consistent. Otherwise, you're just wishing that it's going to happen, and it might happen or it might not happen. If you prayed a lifetime and nothing ever happened for you from that prayer, would it be worth it? What do you think? Let's say you were told, well, pray, these things will come to you, and you lived a whole life where you didn't get anything. At a certain point, you might think to yourself, why am I doing this? There's no palpable, immediate benefit here. But is there a benefit? What do you think? You think it's a good? Yeah, yes. Mm, yeah, yeah.
How can I thank when I need to thank you for giving me the blessing to thank
Yeah, exactly.
self
Yeah.
or self itself the blessing.
Yes,
Okay, it's not
exactly. 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 Yeah, remember there's that line from Sadi, right? That her nafas do shukr wajib ast, ye mumid hayat hast o digar mafarr hezal hast. Or I think there, right? For every breath you take, you actually owe God two gratitudes. One, mufarr hezat, it feels good, to breathe, right? And then of course it also extends your life. So you're always in a deficit of gratitude. And there's a very famous prophetic saying, of course, لا أحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك, right? I I do not enumerate your praises. It's often translated as I cannot. But the aforementioned Professor Chittick once mentioned to me, said it's not cannot, it's do not. That is the Prophet saying, I'm not even going to try because he knows the rank, he knows the jalala of God more than anybody. You are as you praise yourself. That's in the final analysis. It's God who praises himself on his own level in his own way. Right. So, nevertheless, we're supposed to act in the ways that we can to the best of our abilities. And if you have a life where you've just been praying and you've not received anything, that's fine. Like you said, the reward has been it's already been given to you. People say, "Oh, it's the path, it's the walking that matters, not the actual goal." But this is repurposed in New Age spirituality in very insidious ways, and I'm not going to get into that here, right? But I think some of you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I mean the path, of course, it matters. You have to do the walking. In the end, it's wonderful if you've just been able to live a life properly of prayer. There's that one saying of Meister Eckhart, I think, that I read many years ago, where he said, if I was just to say thank you once to God from the depths of my being, then that would have been a very fulfilling life. Just to say thank you one time properly to God. Okay, good. Should I continue? What do you think? I got a few more. I'm happy to. Yeah, Saba, what do we got? Yeah.
And then obviously the influence surprise and not really understanding change as a entire life has offered. And then they have nothing else to do, so they go to the Met to inform of that.
Yeah.
And he basically just says in response that, I'm continuing performing my duty as I've always done. So this doesn't really change anything because I wasn't trained
Yeah.
to sort of secure my own.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's like Rabia, right? Rabia Ladaway, the famous story, as you know. Speaking of, such a great female, friend of God and one of the great exemplars in the tradition. And again, for all of human civilization, she's like a real model of spiritual devotion. By the way, I should say something because we're talking about female spirituality in Islam. Sufi Corner has an event, inshallah, that it's in the works in September on the theme of female spirituality. 1 or 2 day workshop where we, bring some enlightened female speakers, academics to come and talk about exactly these kinds of things. People like Rabia and others. So, but that story of Rabia, there's many, many wonderful tales about Rabia. One of my absolute favorite is, of course, all of the great friends of God wanted to marry her. She was one of the only friends of God in the entire Islamic tradition who didn't get married. There's like a handful of them. She was one of them. And Hassan al-Basri, who was a great, great sage himself, proposed to her one day in marriage. And she replied to him, she said, why don't you find another dirty-minded woman like you to marry? I'm busy with God. This is what kind of right? It always gets me to laugh. So this is to her, real strength, spiritual strength and confidence, and her poetry, especially her love poetry for God. It's out of this world. She doesn't see anybody but God. Nobody can come in the way. It's just her and the divine beloved. And so one day, of course, that famous story goes that she was seen walking down the street with the firebrand in one hand and a bucket of water in the other hand. And people asked her, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, here with this firebrand, I want to burn paradise itself. The gardens of paradise will burn with this fire. And with this water, I want to put out all the fires, of hell, so that only the sincere lovers of God are left." So again, it talks to exactly this theme. Very good. Okay. Now, look at this one. Speaking of God giving and not giving, this one is very, very profound. Hikam. If there's only one that you walk away with having memorized today, I would say it would probably be this one. It says, إنما يؤلمك المنع لعدم فهمك عن الله فيه. إنما يؤلمك المنع لعدم فهمك عن الله فيه. Withholding, when things don't come to you, when you don't get your way, withholding only causes you pain because you fail to understand that God is in the withholding. So that's the shawbait of all of the aphorisms, right? Why are you in pain when you don't get what you want? Because you fail to realize that God is right there. In that very withholding, He's the one who's present. In fact, He's the one who's allowing this withholding to happen. He's right there for you. So you don't, and you're pained by the thing that you didn't get, but you're not seeing what is actually laid bare in front of you. That's why many of the Sufis say that when human beings give you things, you should be happy, but you should be a little bit sad too, right? Because what's being withheld from the divine side? And this is another hikam of Ibn Ata'illah that's not in this list, where he says, "Al-ata min al-khalq hirman, wal-man'u min al-khaliq ihsan." Right? That when people give you things, that's actually deprivation. They're depriving you from the real gift. But when God holds things back from you, that's the essence of beautiful giving. He's giving you everything that you need when you're not getting what you want, so to speak. I like that. It's a statement like that resonates with many of us, right? Because we go through this experience in life. You don't get what you want. How many times have you seen in your own lives, maybe for yourself or somebody the thing that they wanted so badly, they were in so much pain. In the end, they realized that it wasn't even good for them anyway, and something much better came later. And had they just cultivated that from the beginning, they would have been with God right there from the beginning. And then they feel bad. Oh, I wish I didn't. But that's okay. You can learn next time. But the problem is human beings, we tend to forget, right? So then we need to be reminded. But it can happen that this becomes second nature. It can happen like anything that the human being can achieve, right? It's with practice and with constant reminder, it can become a part of you. Okay. Now, so we've been looking at the theme. We've kind of transitioned to the question of ignorance, right? We saw illusion. We saw the idea that you think that you're in control. You think it's up to you, and the questions that you're going to ask of God is really on your terms. And He's kind of breaking that, and He's saying, well, actually, it's the other way around. It's all in God's terms. Wallahu al-ghani wa antum al-fuqara, the Quranic verse says. God is the rich, you're the poor. That's all that you have. You have nothing else to give to God. That's why the great Sufi, they turned to God one time, one of the great Sufis, and said, what can I give you? You have everything. What am I supposed to give to you? You're Rabbul Alameen. You're the King of the world, the Lord of the worlds. What could I possibly offer you? And then in a very famous reply, God says, you have to come to me, or give me, or come to me in different narrations. You have to come to me with what I don't have. And then what's that? Al-dhull wal-iftiqar, lowliness and poverty. That's what God doesn't quote unquote have. So come to God with your no-thingness, your nothingness. Okay. So then He's going to go back to that theme, dealing with ignorance. This is one that's very pertinent for our times on many levels, as you'll come to see. Ajhalun nas man taraka yaqina ma indahu li dhanni ma inda nas. You got that one, right? It's kind of funny. Ajhalun nas man taraka yaqina ma indahu li dhanni ma inda nas. The most ignorant person is the one who leaves his certainty for someone else's conjecture. It doesn't even need an explanation. You kind of get what I'm saying. You kind of catch his drift, right? The most ignorant person is the one who leaves his certainty for someone else's conjecture. Just pay attention to the world that we live in, and you'll see many levels of application of this exact thing. Right? It tends to be the case that when we're not firm and strong inside of ourselves, we don't have the self-knowledge, the self-realization, the confidence, of what we know, we get sidetracked by people and their opinions and that kind of thing. But usually it's just at the level of opinions, right? If you know who you are and you know what you're about, then why would you ever follow somebody else in their conjecture? right? Dhann in Arabic, they say, dhann is translated as conjecture. It means many things in Arabic, actually. It can also mean certainty. I won't, that's another part of it. But dhann usually it's if you were to put it on a scale, it's like, under 50%. It's like 49%, 48% certainty. It's never at 50 when it's dhann like this. So why would you base anything off of someone who's giving you that, especially in the case when you're actually certain about the things that you have? How many times have you seen people, they know things, they're certain about things, they're going in a particular direction. It might not even have to do with religion. It might be like a course they're picking or whatever, and then their friend says something, they're like, "Oh, maybe I should be doing that." It's this total insecurity that they have, right? The contemporary human being, they're characterized largely by insecurity of themselves. They've lost the sense of what they are as people. That sense of firmness is gone. And the one quality amongst many others that the Quran extols in the prophets and in many other individuals is the idea of firmness. The most highest level of prophets, are the ulul azmi min ar-rusul, the prophets of the firmest resolve, right? Adam is not counted amongst them because the Quran says that he did not have azma, he didn't have that resolve. But there's the five, right? Noah, Jesus, Moses, Nabi Isa, and Prophet Ibrahim, of course. They have the firmest resolve. They're at a different level of firmness. And then, of course, for individuals, they can be rasikhuna fil ilm. They can be firmly rooted in knowledge. So just compare that to the kinds of certainties that pass as certainties in the world that we live in today. For the most part, it's like not fashionable to be certain about anything other than the lunch that you want to have and maybe the movie that you need to watch tonight, right? For the most part, it's kind of like looked down upon if you're so certain. People might think it's arrogant or something like this. One of my teachers once said, he said, people think I'm arrogant. It's not arrogance, it's certainty. It's true. It's very much the case. And we often mistake uncertainty for humility, which is another part of it. And that's not real humility. Real humility, we'll see. He's going to talk about that in a moment. That's a very different thing. Don't think because somebody is not sure about something that they're actually humble. It doesn't work that way, right? So don't mistake, lack of certitude for humility or certitude for pride. Okay, good. Any questions so far? Okay. I don't think I need much more time, but I hope that we can have a conversation after too. Okay. Number 164, which is towards the end of the text, it deals with veils, so I'm going to talk about this one. I won't spend too much time on it. إنما حجب الحق عنك شدة قربه منك. إنما حجب الحق عنك شدة قربه منك. All that veils the real, that is God, from you, is his extreme nearness to you. That's why you don't, quote unquote, see God, right? Because he's so intensely close to you. Otherwise, you'd see God, right? But what you do is you see yourself, right? Think of the one image that they normally give is like that of the sun. Let's see the sun, you look at it, it's so blinding. You can't look at it for too long, right? Because you look at it and it'll stymie your vision and you can even lose your sight, right? If you do. So the intensity of God's light, it's so strong that you fail to recognize the luminous presence that's right in front of you all the time. Speaking of which, as we speak about lights, these lights that are coming in are blinding some of you. I'm noticing. Maybe you can move over a little bit if it's uncomfortable for you. There, I think the shade's not there yet. Bas. This guy's still safe. You picked that spot, you sat here, and it's still the spot in the house, right? Okay, that one I'm not going to comment on so much, but I do want to say maybe one thing about it was that the Sufis, of course, in the tradition, they've always recognized that God is in his essence and in his whole otherness and his whole similarity and transcendence that's simultaneously that he's so distant from you, but also so near to you. So this text here, it's focusing on his complete nearness to you, but to the point that it becomes a kind of transcendence because it's just so close. It's so blinding, that light. But many of them say that in order to cultivate that awareness of God, all of them would agree with this on one level or another, of course, is that you have to not look at the sun so much, but look at the rays. Like Ayn al-Quzat, my guy here, he says that the the sun in its essence, it's blinding, but and burning, it burns and blinds. But the rays of the sun, they hug and they caress. And of course, the rays are understood by someone like Ain al-Quzat and of course Ibn Ata'illah and many others as nothing other than the person of the Prophet himself. Right? You want to get close to God? Well, it's very easy actually, right? Because the Quran tells the Prophet to say, if you love God, and everybody does love God. It's just whether they acknowledge it or not, that's another thing. But everybody loves God. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمْ اللَّهُ. If you love God, then follow me. The Prophet is said to say, follow me. And then God will love you. So eliciting God's special love for you is linked directly to following the Prophet in that verse. So it's easy. So you can hold on to the rays. If you hold on to the rays and you look at them, you go to the sun. Okay. Now, let me read a couple more with you. I'm having fun here, so I could do this all day. I wish I brought more, actually. With some luck, this translation should come out maybe in a year, inshallah. As you see it comes with the Arabic, so that can help readers. Okay, this is going back to the question of life and just the priceless nature of life itself. ما فاتك من عمرك لا عوض له وما حصل لك منه لا قيمة له. The missed opportunities in your life cannot be returned, just like he said. All those breaths, done. But then he says, so what is left of your life, is priceless. It's the most valuable thing that you have is your life, whatever is left of it, right? Because going back to what we said earlier, you're dying. You're dying. It's not meant to be a morbid kind of thing. Don't think of it as something. No, it's quite the opposite, right? You're dying is another way of saying you're going home. You're going to that banquet. Like Maulana says, right? Everyone's going back, whether they like it or not. The question is, are they going to go back being dragged by their hair, kicking and screaming, or are they going to go back in garlands of flowers, dancing and laughing? Either way, you're going there. So it depends on how you get there, but you're going. So whatever is left of your life, whether it's a good one you've had before, or whether it's a bad one you've had, or a combination of the two, that's usually the case for most people. What's in front of you, it's like, nothing can replace that. Nothing can replace those moments that are left. So that's why he says, La qimata lahu. It has no qima, it has no value, literally. It's priceless. You can't put a price on that. Okay. Now, oh yeah, look at this one. This one is, oh man. Okay, there are two. I'm gonna leave the humility one, which I promised you. I'm gonna leave that for the end, because it requires a little more unpacking. But look at this one. This goes back again to ignorance and grief and sorrow caused by that ignorance. This is another one. If you were to memorize maybe another one, or maybe just this one, this would be sufficient for you. ليقل ما تفرح به يقل ما تحزن عليه. ليقل ما تفرح به يقل ما تحزن عليه. To lessen what causes you sorrow. How am I supposed to stop having sorrow? He's going to tell us. To lessen the causes for your sorrow. Ready for this? Lessen what causes you joy. Look at that. There you have it. It's the simplest thing. It's kind of almost self-explanatory. But how fast do we forget that? Even just as I say this, we'll forget it, right? To lessen what causes you sorrow, lessen what causes you joy. The less things that make you happy, when you don't have them, the less will you be sad. That's why the Quran, gives you a very realistic picture of joy and sorrow. If you look at all the verses in the Quran that speak about joy, farah, like as your name, right, from that same root, right? There's so many wonderful verses in the Quran, for example, that speak about, right? قُلْ بِفَضْلِ اللَّهِ وَبِرَحْمَتِهِ وَبِذَلِكَ فَلْيَفْرَحُوا, right? هُوَ خَيْرٌ مِمَّا يَجْمَعُونَ. Say in the bounty of God, right, and in His mercy, in that let them have joy. Let them be joyous in that. That's endless. God's bounty is endless. That's not the kind of thing that's going to go away and cause you sadness. God's bounty will never go away from you. It's the thing that brought you here. It's the thing that's sustaining you, and it's the thing that's going to meet you on the other end too. ما نبودی معتقصا ما نبود لطف تو نا گفتی ما میشنود, Maulana says, right? That before we came into this world, we're in this place, no parts, nothing, just kind of, just in this undifferentiated state. We were listening. We were listening to as Professor Nasser has translated it so poetically, our we were listening to your bounty. We were listening to the bounty of your silent prayer. With our silent prayer, our silent prayer was listening to your bounty. From the beginning, we're making this prayer, just listening to God, His unuttered bounty and His declaration to bring us into this world and sustain us at every moment. We were hearing that right from the very beginning. And that verse from Maulana is, it's a tearjerker. So, yeah, you can feel free to do the necessary if you have to. That's oof. Okay. So here it is, right? You're gonna have a lot of sadness in this world for sure. لكي لا تأسوا على ما لكي لا تأسوا على ما تفرحوا بما أتاكم. Right? There's a verse in the Quran that speaks about exactly this, so that the fact that you should not be so worried and be overly joyous about the things that have you, right? And not being excessively saddened by the things that miss you. Why? Because you should know that everything is in a kitab. It's already been ordained for you. You shouldn't worry about it so much. Whatever's coming to you is coming to you. Whatever is not coming to you is not coming to you, and don't fret about it so much.
Told us about something about injustice and justice, like values within a group.
Yeah. What about it? Yeah.
How about that? Like,
did I say something about justice and injustice?
not like when you see the injustice around you, you have.
Oh, at the beginning, the Martin Luther King aphorism. Yeah. Here, let me read it to you, just so I quote him properly. Yeah. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, which is one of his most famous. Right?
So how to like leave the other things kind of like, or not to.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. Well, the thing is that a lot of the times many Sufis are sometimes portrayed in usually secondary literature and sometimes in popular culture too, and sometimes in and around shrines, around shrine culture in Cairo, Lahore, places like that, for being kind of so concerned with God and kind of like just not really caring about the world, and all these terrible things are happening to somebody, and you see this qalandar, and he's just like, oh, who cares? I'm with Allah, and how irresponsible of them, really, to not uphold justice, to not do things beautifully, to not help other people when they're wronged. And nothing could be further from the truth. Sufis historically, number one, they've been the greatest freedom fighters against all the anti-colonial movements, during the colonial period, right? The majority of them were, if not all of them, were led the resistance movements by major Sufi figures. So there's this idea that Sufism is a kind of form of passivism, or at least a kind of passivity. And one way to think about it is that they definitely have a passive attitude towards the world, or they cultivate that often. Not every Sufi, because it's difficult to generalize about them on so many issues, but they never take a passive attitude towards things that, for example, are affronts to God or against the divine law or the rights of other human beings. Right? It's very easy. I was talking to the Tarjuman about that just this morning, right? It's very easy if somebody wrongs you to even let go of that. But if you see a beloved being wronged, then you're gonna have something to say about that, right? And you're gonna do something about that. So it's kind of like that, right? So Martin Luther King's statement here, that very well could have been said by any Sufi, right? And many of them have spoken about exactly this very thing, the fact that you need to be able to put the world in its proper place and establish what is known as sulh, right? A kind of wholesome balance. So the flip side of it is that if there's injustice, and should you go to that level of injustice in order to meet the wrong, or to kind of met out punishment? And that's an issue that the texts perpetually deal with in different ways. The Islamic theologians deal with that, the philosophers deal with that. Some major Sufi masters also deal with these more technical, ethical problems about how much injustice is injustice, and at what point is your enemy, wronged, and at what point has your enemy done so much wrong that you should be able to, address it in one way or another. But when you keep the divine balance in mind, that's normally where they look at things. They always will look at things from the perspective of God, because God, He's al-Adl, right? He's the just. So if the scales of justice are not upheld properly in this world, then there's disorder, right? And if there's disorder, then that is to say that things are not in their proper place. Then it's according to the will of man and not the will of God. So then they seek to really establish that. al-Ghazali actually in this book has a whole discussion where he gets into what is known as the nizamul khair, or the order of the good. How is the order of the good meant to be upheld in a world when there's so much ugliness and so much injustice and so many bad things happening, not just to bad people, but also good people? The traditional question of theodicy. So we deal with it here in that book, and then also in another book that I edited with a colleague of mine that would for sure be of interest to you. It's called Islam. What's it called? From the Divine to the Human. That's what it's called. From the Divine to the Human. Yeah, and that deals with contemporary Muslim philosophers' approaches to the question of evil and suffering in a post-COVID kind of context. So we deal with like the problem of theodicy, but also the issue of palliative care and things like that. I hope that kind of satisfies some of your question. It's a very complicated issue, of course, and there's so many problems that need to be cleared up. But I would say that of the authors who deal with this, Maulana in the Masnavi, he deals with the justice and injustice balance, or the equilibrium of establishing justice, in an amazing way, in so many verses. And he had this one verse where he said, Charkh Izad. I forgot the first misra, but it goes, Har an kas ke pof konad, rishash besuzad. He was saying that the person who blows on the world in a wrong way. A lot of people use this for like the environmental crisis, right? If he just blows on the world in the wrong way, rishash besuzad, his whole beard will go on fire, right? So that is to say, everything has to be put in its exact place, right? Otherwise, you wreak havoc upon yourself and society. It's an amazing verse. Yeah, Masnavi. And there's so many like that in the Masnavi. You go to the Masnavi, is all kinds of, because a lot of these Sufis, they were very much concerned with not just the afterlife, right? But they were very much concerned with what is known as the tadbir in this world, the management of affairs in this world. All of them dealt with it. Ibn Ata'illah deals with that too extensively, right? How to comport yourself in the world properly is very important, because it affects the quality of your life here and the quality of others' lives, and then therefore the spaces and times and opportunities and instances in which you can live a spiritual life. So, the two of them kind of come together, right? A wholesome worldly existence and then a robust spiritual life, so to speak. They kind of have to come together. Good. Okay. Let me read one last one. I promise you this is the last one, because it is the last one. I've run out of things to say here, as you can see. All right. So this one goes back to humility, and there's probably not a lot for me to say like I thought there was, because you guys are all smart, and I've come to realize that over the course of this last hour or however long we've been talking. This one says the following: ليس المتواضع الذي إذا تواضع رأى أنه فوق ما صنع ولكن المتواضع الذي إذا تواضع رأى أنه دون ما صنع. So this is a longer aphorism. The humble person is not the one who sees himself as above his act of humility, but the one who sees himself as below it. So the idea here is, if you see yourself as humble, you can only do that from the perspective where you're actually looking upon yourself as kind of like, from up, so to speak, right? You're there. You're looking at yourself. Even you're looking down at yourself, for example. But you put yourself up to do that. So that's not a humble act, right? So he's saying that a truly humble person, he doesn't see himself as being, in any way associated with a self to which actions can be subscribed or ascribed. That is to say that there is no self that is left to be seen in order to be humbled, right? So nothing is above the nature of an action that can be analyzed and studied, because there's no individual that is there to evaluate the aboveness or the lack thereof. It's just a even playing field. There's just simply nothingness. That's all. And then at that level, fine, you can, the quality of humility can be ascribed to that individual, but not by that person. We often think that humility has to do with a kind of abasement of yourself, right? And there's a very famous prophetic saying, which says, "Al-mu'min la yudhillu nafsahu." The believer never belittles himself. And Ghazali, in his book on pride, he goes through all kinds of cases of where people think they're being humble when they're actually not. Like someone insults you and you're like, oh yeah, maybe you want to insult this thing about me too, and you start like playing into it, and they're like, this is stupidity. You're a fool if you do this, because you're basically putting yourself down, right? And the believer should never put themselves down, because they're created in the divine image. That's nothing to sneeze at. That's a very exalted status. So the individual shouldn't debase themselves, but at the same time, there needs to be a recognition that insofar as they see a self that's to be belittled or to be exalted or to be made to feel bad or to be made to feel good, all of that means there's still a self at that level. And that's the problem, right? Going back to that earlier idea, right? It's freedom from the self, not freedom of the self. And only from the divine perspective can one look out onto the world as wholly other than the things in the world, but also remarkably and mysteriously inscribed into them too. And that's the goal of the spiritual life. That's what they call maqam ma ramait. You did not throw when you threw, but it was God who threw. Yes, Sabah. You had so earlier you were doing this, which meant, I think it meant put the volume up. Then now you're doing this. Now either you're telling me I've gone crazy, or you're saying the camera is running out. Like, are we still doing that? I'm done. Yes. Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'm happy to talk to you guys. Anybody? Yeah, sure.
Gave aphorism, a quote from Marcus Aurelius, which, in my opinion, is very stoic.
Yeah.
And a lot of his observations as well as observations.
Yeah.
And a couple of minutes ago, when we were discussing the Sufi way of thinking, you mentioned pacifism, which, in my humble opinion, very limited view is stoicism, because it's a consciousness that starts from the inside, a collective consciousness too, but there is an effort after an output, so not entirely passive.
Yeah, no, you're right. Definitely, the Sufis. There's a lot of their way of looking at the world. It's a very you can refer to as a kind of passive active complementarity, and that's because the divine names themselves and that they try to conform themselves to, they themselves have kind of passive and active elements, right? So. Yeah, everything's in balance. Like that's why Sachiko Murata wrote one of the most brilliant books, really, on Islam in the English language, is by Sachiko Murata. It's called The Tao of Islam. And in that book, what she does, amongst many things, is she says, well, Islam is usually compared to Christianity, because that's kind of the normal way it's been done in the West. But she said that, that number one, that's not her background. She comes from a Japanese background, right? And lived in Iran for many years. And so she's very much familiar with Far Eastern ways of thinking and classical Islamic ways of thinking. And she said in that book, she said, I've found that Taoism and the whole yin-yang complementarity, it's in a greater accord with the way Islam looks at the world, cosmologically speaking, ethically speaking, and so on and so forth. And so why? Because just like you have a passive and active elements in Taoism, in the yin-yang, you have the same thing in the configuration of the divine names, right? He has qualities and names that are kind of majestic. They're known as the names of majesty, right? He's stern, for example, just, severe. Normally they associate those with the qualities of a father, right? And then he has what they call the attributes of beauty, the names of beauty, right? Mercy, compassion, so on and so forth, often ascribed to the qualities of a mother, related to the qualities of a mother. So in the ideal situation in Sufism is to really be able to balance all of the divine qualities together within one's person. There's a very famous saying of the Prophet, which is like the main teaching of the Sufis when it comes to actualizing divine qualities, where he says, تَخَلَّقُوا بِأَخْلَاقِ اللَّهِ. Literally take on the quality traits of God. See, God has all of the positive quality traits that were a human being to take them on and actualize them and internalize them and live a life in accordance with them, they'd become what you would call muta'allih, or someone who becomes godlike, right? Which is not an alien idea. You find that in Islam. You find that Plato, for example, has that idea of theosis, as you all know, and so on and so forth. And so the idea behind all of this is that it's not that the passive is greater and that the active is somehow less, or vice versa, but rather it's all about that balance, right? Now that's very much the Quran's perspective, right? وَلَا تُخْسِرُ الْمِيزَانِ, the Quran says. Don't cut the scales short. Oh, thank you. I put it here. Thanks. So that's I hope that answers your question. Yeah, but Marcus Aurelius is my personal favorite. I love his meditations, and I really think that one very nice way of teaching Sufism, I've done this with my students sometimes, is to actually introduce them to a few of Marcus Aurelius's meditations first, just to kind of smooth them into that world. Yeah, he was a Stoic, and just such a realistic picture of the nature of the reality, right? Maybe not so much with the hope that you find in someone like Ibn Ata'illah, but nevertheless, it's like even a little cutthroat, but matter of fact, but fairly correct, on how to deal with this kind of thing, adversity in life. Good. Yeah, you saw a couple that were very much like the one about if you want to reduce your sorrows, well, just reduce the things that make you happy. That could have been right from his meditations, right? Yes. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a very good question. The aphorisms, so there's, as I mentioned earlier, there are, if you were to enumerate them, 262. That's the normal numbering. Only a handful of them quote the Quran directly. Like a couple of aphorisms are like quotes from the Quran. One aphorism is a hadith, and one aphorism is an Arabic poem by Halaj, actually. But if you were to enumerate the Quranic verses that show up in the aphorisms, I'd say, top of my head, I'd say about 12 altogether. 12 or 9 to 12 actual verses from the Quran that are cited in part or in whole. Often when he quotes the Quran in the aphorisms, it's directly to call your attention to a specific teaching that he's drawing on, and that the verse in the Quran explicitly addresses. So it might be a term. Sometimes he gives an interpretation of a verse from the Quran, like the لِيُنْفِقْ ذِي سَعَةٍ مِنْ سَعَةِ, for example. The verse in the Quran, let the one who has wealth, let him spend his wealth. Normally that's understood in ways like that have to do with, if you have wealth, help people, that kind of thing. And he gives an interpretation of that which is consistent with Sufi worldview, which is this has to do with the people who have to, expend on the way to God, teaching people, guiding people, this kind of thing, being open spiritually, something along those lines. And this is kind of the normal way he operates in the aphorisms. But if you were to take away direct references to the Quran and just go to allusions, maybe it's like a term, for example, or a word or a concept, then the cluster of associations opens up. It's actually very easy, and many of the traditional commentaries do this, like Ibn Ajiba, for example, and others, to go through the aphorisms and find allusions to the Quran in them. Like, for example, that one that I was just speaking about. If you want to have less sorrow, then don't the things that give you farah, the things that give you joy, don't make those much, right? That's a direct allusion to this verse in the Quran that I was mentioning earlier, right? لكي لا تأسوا على ما تفرحوا بما آتاكم ولكي لا تأسوا على ما آتاكم ولا تفرحوا بما آتاكم, right? إلا في كتاب من قبل أن نبرأها, the verse says, right? That you shouldn't be so excessively happy with the things that you get, and you shouldn't be so sad with the things that pass you by, because it's all in a book, it's all been there. So when he uses that word, for sure, without a doubt, he has in mind that verse in the Quran and a cluster of associated meanings that arise from it. And this is not just unique, of course, to Ibn Ata'illah. Every Sufi text is like this. That's what makes it actually very challenging, because if you don't know the Quran well and you're reading Sufi text, you'll think, oh, what a great idea that is. But it's like literally from the Quran, and in so many instances, it's just they're quoting the Quran. Sometimes it'll be one word. It might just be even the ending of one verse, and they expect everyone to get it. Maulana, for example, Rumi in the Masnavi, there's a reason why they call it Quran Dar Zaban Pahlavi, the Quran in Persian. One of the reasons is because it's like a commentary upon the Quran. The other reason is because it literally has thousands of Quranic verses interspersed into the Persian text, or the Arabic Quran, but also many of the verses in Persian are like translations or like communications of the Quran. And sometimes, like in one instance I'm thinking, he even uses a verse from the Quran, which is in Arabic, and fits it into the Masnavi's meter, which is in Persian, and it's the exact verse, and it's the exact meaning that should be there. And it's like, how did he ever do that? It's still a mystery to me. It's وَخَرَّ Musa sa'iqa, that verse. If you look at where that is, and it's in the context in which he's using it, it's perfect. And it's not a frivolous thing. It's the statement to make right there. There have been a couple of, just to go back to that, sometimes you'll find, scholars, they'll do like concordances of Sufi texts. They'll go through all of a Sufi text and pull out all the Quranic allusions. Many years ago, Ha'ir Yazdi did one of Masnavi, all the Quranic allusions. Masnavi has 26,000 verses, and he found, I think it was like 3,000, right? Like one book that he did, Muntakhab Asar Qurani in the Masnavi. And then recently, this Khurram Shahi, Ba'adin Khurram Shahi from Iran, very famous scholar of literature and Quran and Hafiz, he also did a book, Quran or Masnavi, and he's found like many more allusions. And so Ibn Ata'illah is like that. It's because it's in pithy form, you don't always see it. In my translation, whenever it was a direct reference, I gave it. And if it was allusion that was big enough, I gave it. But I didn't do that for every instance, because I literally would have to like put one for like almost all of them. Quzat, speaking of whom, the great challenge working with him has been that he does this at a level that I've not seen other than Ibn Arabi, of course, where his prose, it's fused with the Quran to the point that you sometimes, is it Quran that I'm reading? Is it his words? Because it's Quran. Like when they wanted to burn Ibn Arabi's Futuhat, because it was considered heretical, at least in some quarters. Ibn Khaldun passed a fatwa against it. They couldn't burn it because it had so much Quran in there. They were like, what are we going to do with this heretical book? It has so much Quran. So they're all like that. And that's one of the good things about contemporary scholarship, is that it's really, it's emphasizing this greatly, the relationship of the Quran to Sufi thought and practice. It's just so essential. And one can even say, without understanding the Quran, one cannot understand Sufism or Sufi thought. I hope that answers that questioner's question.
there a reason, if any, why usually mystical writings come off as being particular in most traditions?
Yeah.
Christians or Tao, or in our case, Sufi.
Yeah.
They come off as obscure.
Yeah, they do. Sometimes it's because they're purposely veiling and concealing what's going on. Like I was mentioning to you about Nifari, right? Some have said, he's kind of veiling it on purpose, for sure. But also they're sometimes in a state, when you're in a state of love or a stupor or some kind of, great thing that's happened to you, right? And someone comes and talks to you in that very moment, you might be a little incoherent, right? It happens if you're really in love, for example, this might happen to you, right? Or if you're like, your team wins, let's say and then you're like, yeah. And then someone comes up to you and they're asking you about paying bills or something at that moment. You're like, get lost, don't talk to me, because you're so happy, right? The Prophet himself gives a very beautiful example of a man who loses his camel. And of course, he's lost his camel, so he's sad. And then camels in traditional society, this is like wealth, right? This is like a big thing. He loses it. He's so distraught because he lost this camel of his. And then he runs and finds the camel. And then he's, of course, elated and very happy. And then he says to God, oh God, you're the servant and I'm the Lord. Right? And the Prophet doesn't say this man is a kafir and he should die or anything like that. He says, he makes an excuse for him. He says, لِشِدَّةِ فَرَحِهِ, because of the intensity of his joy, he got mixed up a little bit, right? And so he said the opposite of what was really happening. It's also alluding to a deep mystery between the union between lover and beloved, right? Is what's also being alluded to there, as the Sufis would explain. So sometimes the texts are like that. Sometimes they're just like, there's what they call iltibas. There's a kind of like veiling intentionally. Sometimes it's not intentionally. Sometimes it's because of the exaltedness of the language. A lot of poems are like that. Nifari, as I mentioned, is like that. A lot of Ibn Atayla is like this. But then there's another part of it too, which is that sometimes Sufi texts are saying things extremely clearly. And the reminder is that when it seems like things are veiled, the one who's veiled, the mahjub, it's us. Right? And Sufi texts have a very interesting way of exposing that in us. I remember when I was reading al-Ghazali, it took me, I spent, about, I think 10 to 14 years writing this book. And 1 year was just spent reading his writings. And I remember walking around and like, sometimes I was in a state of ecstasy. Sometimes I was crying. Sometimes it was insane. My wife even said to me, she's like, I've never seen you like this. You're like, this is like not you. Like I'm usually like a sober dude. At least I like to think so. Here he was just bringing out things that just never. It was like as if there was all these stored up things, and he was just drawing them out. And a lot of these authors are like that. They're like, okay, are you ready for the fire that I'm gonna put you into right now? You have to be ready. And sometimes you're not. So like for me, it took me a while to like, I had to get used to it, get used to his language. People who read Hafez and Rumi are like this too. They'll read them and for 1 week, they'll be gone somewhere else because they're just totally in a whole different world. And sometimes it's very beautiful that happens, but often it exposes you to yourself, your own limitations, the things that you thought should be a certain way. And then this author, now you're reading, he's telling you it's the opposite. What are you going to do with that? Ibn Arabi is a master of this, right? As Ali, you know very well how this works. You're reading the Futuhat, and he'll say something like, oh, this section that I'm on, because he's dealing with the prayers, but the section on the wudu, which is the precondition for the prayer, it's after the section on the prayer. And he says that, your logical mind tells you that it should be this way, but I'm not organizing this in any logical way. I'm not sitting down and thinking about this. This is just, it's a fat from God. I'm just going with whatever tajalli, whatever self-disclosure God has given me. And he literally writes like that. So you literally just hop on for the ride and just go with it, right? And the more you are in that world and the more you engage them, the more you realize that there's such a mercy and a blessing actually in these Sufi texts when they're like that. They're couched and veiled for these reasons that I mentioned, but they're always there to take you to yourself. Sometimes a person will read a text and they just won't ever feel it. That's a possibility too. But when you find a certain attraction to a certain author or a text or an idea, follow it, pursue it, and ask God to open the door, and you see that many amazing things can happen. Many doors can open. And at minimum, I've never regretted in my life ever reading a Sufi text, but I can say I pretty much regretted every moment where I spent time reading. I don't mean to mention names, but I think I should. Wittgenstein and Kant, for example. Ali John.
My language a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is the Wittgensteinian in you is coming out. Yes, yes.
Those of the understanding.
It's everything. I think for these authors, you know, they're writing from such a different world and from such a different space that the only way that we can really understand them properly is to do it like any author would want on their terms. But their terms are very existential, right? That's the whole thing. Zunnun, the famous Sufi, he has this one saying that really gets to the heart of the matter. He says, إن قدرت في بذل الروح فتعال وإن لم تكن فلا تشتغل بتروحات الصوفية. You guys have heard this before? If you can sacrifice yourself, then come. But if you can't, then don't spend your time talking and messing with the language of the Sufis, right? There has to be a certain, right? A certain overcoming, to use another word that you use, an overcoming, an undoing, right? Not just of a part of the self, but the whole self. We're done. Assalamu alaikum.